How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network, and we come to you from our Season 4 Conference Championship Week around the NCAA recap episode. And before we get started, when you see the screen with the blind resumes on it, what I want you to do is pause the video. And I want you to go into the description of the video. You'll see a link to a straw poll. What that straw poll is for is I've got 4 teams listed out. I did not include the name of the team. Now, if you've been paying attention to the Dynasty, more than likely you'll know which team is which. But I want you to ignore that and just kind of look at these blind resumes. We've got 4 teams, A, B, C, and D. Spots 1 and 2 are already spoken for in the college football playoff that's coming up. But spots 3 and 4 are still, up for debate. And so I have 4 teams listed there. I gave their point per game differentials. I gave their yards per game differentials, so they're all in the positive, obviously. I gave the win-losses of all the opponents they've played, the top 30, their record versus teams that are ranked in the top 30 right now, as well as their overall record, so you know if they lost to a bad team or not. And then, were they conference champion or not? So I think that's going to be fantastic for you guys to know, to give your input and be part of the college football selection committee and help us determine who should be in the college football playoff. Now, with that said, if you've hopefully voted already, we'll get into the recap of what happened around Conference Championship Week. So, of course, if you watched the last video, your Pitt Panthers, you saw, defeated North Carolina State in the ACC Championship game 17-14. It was a hotly contested game. Some big plays by both teams. North Carolina State ran the football very well against us, but we made big plays when we needed to, especially with some huge plays on a couple of the big drives. Aerial plays. Jay Keys had a couple of huge receptions. Todd Sibley had a huge catch. He had a nice game running the football as well. And a big storyline was our ability to convert on third down versus North Carolina State. We were about almost 50% on third down conversions. They were 33%. So they struggled on third down conversions in the game. We did get into the red zone a good amount. That's a little bit misleading. That says we got in 5 times, only scored 3, because one time was at the very end of the game when we nailed out the clock. We actually went into the red zone there, so it's one of those things that it hurts our percentages, but we got the win and did everything we needed to do. A big game around the board for us. Interesting to see how North Carolina State played. I mean, they really used their running game, but they just couldn't seem to string anything together when they needed to. And oftentimes we ran into that as well. You get near midfield, and then all of a sudden you got to punt again. Kenny Pickett, though, had a great game for us, 267 yards passing. He also ran for a 35-yard carry at one point on a nice read option scramble that was a nice play for us. But not a great game for him running the football. Passing the football, he did well. He had 1 interception, of course, but he did have a touchdown pass to Maurice French to cancel that and make up for it. Todd Sibley and C.J. London combined for about 140 yards between the two of them. Probably one of Sibley's best games of the year as he ran for 80 yards. And the studs, Mr. and Mr. Reliable, Maurice French, 6 catches, 46 yards, and a touchdown. And Jay Keys, 7 catches for 125 yards. He had a 62-yard reception, and he also had 2 other catches of 25 and I think 29 yards. So he had 3 gigantic catches for us in this game. Todd Sibley had a big 45-yard catch that didn't actually lead to any points on that drive. It was a nice game for him. So just a game that we needed to have from everybody. They did enough for us to win. With the way our defense was playing. Maurice Collins, unfortunately, 4 sacks against, you saw, but that's because Kenny rolls out to the right a lot. We have a lot of designed plays where he rolls out to the right, and so when he does get sacked, oftentimes that's where it is. Some big games for us. 2 sacks for Sean Wolfgang brings his total, I think, up to 12 on the season. Kaiser Artis-Scott had an interception and a tackle for a loss. He had a gigantic hit on a punt return as well. Paris Ford led the way again, 7 tackles, 1 for a loss. Damar Hamlin had a deflection. It was one of those games for our defense where we didn't force a ton of issues. We didn't get a ton of sacks. We only had 2. We didn't get a ton of, turnovers for us. We had 1 pick, but we just stopped them when we needed to stop them, which was key because we missed out on some points that we could have. Jay bumped 2 missed field goals, 1 from inside of 39 yards. It was a 32-yarder they missed late in the game. That was a tough one because that could have helped push our lead at least beyond 3. Or it would have pushed it to 13 at the time, of course, because NC State scored a touchdown following that. But He did make one field goal for us, which ended up providing to be the difference in the game, so that was key. For NC State, I mean, they used Myers very, very well. 150 yards on 20 attempts passing. That's, what, 7.5 yards an attempt, which is decent. That's pretty good. He did have the one interception, of course, to Kaiser Artis-Scott, but that was at the very end of halftime on a Hail Mary pass. So otherwise, he was very efficient. He ran for 92 yards, had 2 touchdowns, including that incredible 42-yard touchdown run he had very late in the first quarter. Frazier had 12 carries for 74 yards, but he did have a couple of big ones. I think I would say for the most part we contained him. I think he had a 27-yard run and like a 19-yard run. If you take those 2 carries out, he probably had 10 carries for like 25 yards. Maybe a smidge more than that. But I thought we kept him under control fairly well. He killed us in the screen game, though. And again, it was big plays. Both teams seemed to have their set of big plays in this game. Frazier had a 54-yard screen. Sessoms had 4 catches for 63 yards, but I think 2 of them went for like 24 and 20 yards. And I think 3 of them went for like 20 yards apiece, and he had one that was for basically 0 yards. So they used those screens to their advantage. They didn't have a ton of downfield passing options. I think Sessom had maybe 1 pass he caught pretty far downfield. But otherwise, they used the screens. They were very, averse to taking chances and averse to turning the football over. I think they were probably scared by our defense. But it ultimately probably it hurt them because they didn't end up with a ton of big plays other than what they could break out with the run a few times. Good game for their defense, though. Very impressed. McLeod had a deflection and a pick. They had 5 sacks. Jefferson had 2. Stallings had 9 tackles and a sack. The big thing for them, Higgins. Now, you're going to see that says 0 for 4 on field goals. He's like a 77 overall kicker with no power. So the 2 from inside of 40 yards that he actually missed, he had a chance at making those. The 2 from 50-plus yards, he wasn't even close on. So, again, as I've mentioned in my house rules, I treat those as punts. And so I caught it with Maurice French, and I took it out of bounds at the 20 as if it was a touchback from a punt. Just because I don't want to give myself an unfair advantage because the CPU is dumb and doesn't recognize that they have a weak kicker. But big victory for us to win the ACC and at least state our claim to try and make the college football playoff for the 2nd straight year. UAB, they stated their claim as well, 35-31. Incredibly enough, they actually had to come from behind. They needed 2 touchdowns in the 4th quarter to beat a 6-6 Western Kentucky team, but they got the job done. They have to just beat the teams that are put in front of them, and they did just that, winning 35-31 and finishing their regular season 13-0. UCF upset Houston to go 11-2 on the season, 31-28 victory for the Knights, so big victory for a team that we actually beat in non-conference play. Good season for them and our former quarterback, Ben DiNucci, who transferred there in the offseason. LSU, 34-28 over Georgia. Interestingly enough, Joe Burrow actually came out of this game for some periods of time with a minor injury. He should be fine for bowl season and everything like that. No worries about that, but he did miss some time, so Scott had to come in, their backup, and he ended up having an okay game. Passed for under 50%, but he did run for a touchdown. Burrow actually ran for a touchdown before he came out, and LSU did enough to win 34-28. You can see here they built up a 21-0 lead with Burrow still in the game, and then he came out early in the 2nd quarter. Scott came in, had a touchdown run of his own, and then they had to withstand a Georgia comeback. They were up 28-7 at one point, and then Georgia came back and drew very close, but could never eventually overtake them. So a big win for LSU. They'll probably wrapped up the #1 seed in the college football playoff. Boise wins the Mountain West 41-27 over San Diego State, and it was a blowout. It was 41-13 at one point. San Diego State, a couple of garbage time touchdowns. So transfer from Cal, Ross Bowers, quarterback, leads Boise State to a very good season, and a gigantic game here in the scope of the playoff race. UCLA upset by Oregon, and backup quarterback Sam Miller, the junior, starting in place of Justin Herbert. Now, he's like an 89 rated junior. He's a sick player, but he had a great game. Threw for a couple touchdowns, ran for the deciding score, I should say, in the 4th quarter. Fantastic performance from him. Devin Monster did come back into the UCLA lineup, but couldn't lead them to a victory, so knocks them out of the playoff race because they really don't have any good wins at all in the season. They didn't win their conference. Ohio State did perform a little bit of magic and came from behind to beat Wisconsin. They were trailing 27-24 late in the fourth quarter. Ended up using 3 Antonio Williams touchdown runs to end up coming away with the victory. He had a gigantic game. I think 138 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. Dwayne Haskins threw for a couple touchdowns and I think 260 yards as well. As Ohio State beat Wisconsin, finished off their season 13-0, probably clinched the number 2 seed in the college football playoff. And finally, Ohio 37-31 over Western Michigan. The Bobcats, another team that we played in our opening non-conference, in our season opener this year, 11-2. Great season from the Bobcats, and they ended up winning in a little bit of action over Western Michigan. Now, with those results, the coaches poll currently shakes out like this. It's LSU, Ohio State, UAB, Bama, and Pitt jumps Texas and Auburn, or jumps Texas, I should say, up to number 5. NC State falls to number 9 with their loss. UCLA falls entirely out of the top 10 with their loss in the conference championship game to Oregon, who will jump into the rankings, I think, at number 24. So you got UAB, Bama, Pitt, and Texas are the kind of teams that are vying for those final college football playoff spots. You can see how the rest of the rankings kind of shake out as we get a look down at the rest of the viewing. But Oregon's into the polls at 24 with their victory over UCLA, so good for them. Georgia falls back to 19. UCF into the polls as well at 25 in the coaches poll anyways, after they knocked off Houston, who only fell to 16. I was surprised that UCF didn't jump up higher considering their performance. Ohio's ranked 28 right now. Miami's 26 essentially. Virginia's 29. So a lot of ACC or non-conference opponents for us all hanging around in those particular rankings. BCS polls as it stand, pretty similar to the coaches poll. I think the only thing that flipped is Oklahoma's ahead of Auburn, but otherwise it's pretty much exactly the same. Penn State also jumps in the top 10, but same thing. LSU pretty clear number 1. Ohio State pretty clear number 2, but then it gets very murky. You have UAB at 13-0. and Conference USA champion. You have Bama at 11-1, SEC West runner-up behind LSU. Their only loss was to LSU. And then Pitt as ACC champion, but 11-2, 2 losses. And then Texas as Big 12 champion, again, 10-2. So they have 2 losses, but they do have a number of good wins on their schedule as well. And of course, if you want to see how your favorite team's doing, feel free to pause as we go through the remainder of the BCS rankings, just if there's anything that interests you as we go down through the polls. But some other events that we do want to show you: Joe Burrow of LSU does win the Heisman despite missing a portion of the SEC championship game. 54 total touchdowns. I think that was well ahead. Felipe Franks had like 40 total touchdowns. Kendall Hinton had 41. Felipe Franks, I think, had 41. Nick Brossette, his teammate from LSU, actually finished 3rd, and Tommy Stevens of Penn State finished 4th. Now, I will show you the remainder of the awards in an upcoming episode, but we do like showing the Heisman as it comes in. Joe Burrow, congratulations on that award victory. Then, our bowl projection as it stands would be the Orange Bowl, and what a tasty matchup that would be. A rematch against the team that beat us earlier this year in triple overtime, Penn State. But the question then becomes, will we be playing Penn State in the Orange Bowl, or will we potentially get a berth into either the Peach Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl, which are the 2 bowls hosting the college football playoff semifinals this year? As we take a look at LSU's resume, I think it's pretty clear they're the number 1. They beat number 4 Bama, number 8 Auburn, number 16 Arkansas, number 20 Georgia, a good South Carolina team as well. So their SEC schedule very strong this year, and they end up beating all those teams fairly handily. The only ones that really gave me trouble were Bama, which was an instant classic game. They won by 3, and then Georgia, but Georgia was really just coming from behind, and they were, Joe Burrow was out for part of the game, so I think that factored into it. Number 2 team in the nation, definitely you'd have to say clinch the number 2 seed in the college football playoff, will be Ohio State, led by Dwayne Haskins, 26 touchdowns, 4 picks. Mike Weber and Antonio Williams, both with very good seasons for them running the football. And Ohio State, they just don't have that strength of schedule that LSU has to compete with them. The big victory over number 10 Penn State. They beat Michigan pretty handily. They've beaten Wisconsin twice. But other than that, they haven't really played a ton of spectacular teams. I mean, Michigan State, not a great schedule, but they beat everybody that they had to. They even got taken to overtime a couple of times, which kind of hurts their resume a little bit. Now we get into the teams that are fighting for a playoff berth, and they were in the blind resume test if you hopefully did the poll already. UAB, led by John Jacobs, leading yardage passer in the country this season, which is pretty impressive. Kalen Heath, their running back, over 1,000 yards as well, and their receiver had just spectacular season, their number one receiver in terms of yards. Now, the big thing for UAB, they're unbeaten, but they've really not played anybody. They've only beaten, I think, 2 teams with winning records this season. FIU at 7-5, and Rice, who I will say Rice is very good this year. They're 10-2, they're ranked, and they beat Florida at Florida this year. So Rice is a very good team that UAB was able to beat. They beat all the teams that were put in front of them, but those teams weren't particularly impressive. Now, another team that wants to get in against overwhelming odds is Alabama. They're currently number 4 in the country. BCS poll would put them in as the 4 seed. Jalen Hurts, their quarterback, 27-3 touchdown int ratio. BJ Emmons been a very good runner for them. They have Josh Jacobs as well, so Bama's been very good. And the thing with them is their schedule's much stronger than UAB, and really you can't hold against them. Their only loss was at LSU, so in Death Valley, and they lost by 3. They put up a huge fight away from home against LSU. They also beat Arkansas very easily. They beat Auburn very easily. They beat a good Buffalo team that's 8-4 very easily. They beat Michigan State. So they've beaten very good teams on the season. I mean, they've also had some weak ones that they've had to play, Vandy, Kentucky, etc. But they've done a very nice job with the schedule that they were forced to play. So Alabama definitely has a claim to potentially get in. Another team that would like to get in, the Pitt Panthers, led, of course, by junior quarterback Kenny Pickett and freshman sensation Jay Keys and senior receiver Maurice French. Paris Ford, an incredible stifling defense the Panthers have shown. If you look at their game-by-game results, the biggest thing you'll see that stands out is how incredible the defense has been. The points allowed is so good compared to the rest of the country. Losses-wise, the biggest thing that hurts Pitt is that Louisville loss. But if you look at our schedule, we beat Penn State ranked, or lost to Penn State ranked, beat Wake ranked, beat Virginia Tech ranked, beat Miami ranked, beat North Carolina State ranked, beat Virginia, who's right on the precipice of being ranked, beat UCF, who's ranked now, beat Ohio, who's right on the precipice of being ranked. So we have a fantastic resume that really helps us out in spite of our 2 losses. And Texas is very similar. What's been impressive for Texas is how dominant they've been, led by Shane Buechele at quarterback, 28 TDs against just 2 ints. They do have 2 losses. One of them is against a good, not great Notre Dame team in their season opener, and then from there they battled back. They beat a very good Oklahoma team who's also in the top 10 in a great shootout. They beat a very good Kansas State team. They blew them out away from home, which is a pretty impressive game because Kansas State had only had 1 loss to that point, and that was to a top 5 Auburn team. And then they did lose in a tight game away at Oklahoma State. So Texas has been good, and what's been most impressive about them is how dominant that they've been this season. So really the question comes down to, what do you value? Do you value the undefeated season from a group of 5 if you're UAB? Do you value just overall strength of the team and not worry about the conference championship if you like Bama? Do you value the strength of schedule that has been shown by the Pitt Panthers, as well as the fact that they have a conference championship and have played arguably the toughest schedule in the NCAA this year? Or do you value a conference championship in Texas, as well as, again, a fairly strong schedule that they've played with a conference championship? So it just comes down to what things should be valued by the committee when they're evaluating who those final 2 teams in the poll should be. So let me know in the straw poll which pairing in the blind resumes you think should get in. I paired up all the possible combinations. I didn't seed them, but I just did all the possible combinations. So let me know what you think on that. As always, leave in the comments who you think should be in the college football playoff, and we'll see you with the reveal of the playoff field in the next episode. So as always, hail to Pitt, guys. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.